Today, the book I'm interpreting for you is called Barbarians at the Gate. The term barbarians at the gate originates from the history of Germanic tribes invading the Roman Empire. To the Romans, these nomadic Germanic tribes were considered barbarians. However, it was these very barbarians who eventually breached the walls of the Roman Empire's eternal city, Rome, pillaging and plundering before departing triumphantly. In this book, the author uses this term as a metaphor for private equity funds. In the 1980s, there was a surge on Wall Street in the acquisition of companies by private equity funds. These private equity funds acted like barbarians standing outside the gates of corporations. They used aggressive methods to break through the gates, acquire companies, and squeeze out every bit of value before moving on to the next target. The pinnacle event of Wall Street barbarian invasions was the acquisition of the industrial giant, Reynolds Nabisco, by the private equity firm KKR in 1988, with a record-breaking sum of $25 billion. It is often referred to as the most formidable capital acquisition in history. This book delves into the intricacies of this acquisition. The authors of this book are Bryan Burrough and John Helyar, both reporters for the Wall Street Journal. This merger and acquisition case was nothing short of a roller coaster ride, involving various parties vying for dominance on the battlefield of capital markets, with financing techniques and capabilities as their foundation. It incorporated a blend of tactics such as public relations warfare, espionage, social maneuvering, and decision-making games, making it a classic textbook example of corporate acquisitions. This book has two main protagonists. One is the acquired company, Reynolds Nabisco, and the other is the private equity firm initiating the acquisition, KKR. Reynolds Nabisco, although not widely recognized, is the owner of two legendary brands, Camel cigarettes and Oreo cookies. In its long and complex corporate history, this company even once owned Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC. Reynolds Nabisco rightfully stood as one of the largest giants in the American tobacco and food industries. On the other hand, KKR was a rising star in the world of Wall Street private equity funds. In just 1 year in 1988, KKR accounted for a quarter of all global acquisition deals, with a total value of $20 billion. Throughout the 1980s, KKR's acquisition scale reached a staggering $45 billion, which could have bought 10 of the Fortune 500 companies at that time. Reynolds Nabisco's president at the time was Ross Johnson. He came from a modest Canadian background and faced hardships during the Great Depression. After graduating from college, he worked as an accountant for several years, sold light bulbs, and even taught part-time at a university. He possessed exceptional talents in sales and social interactions, which eventually led him to the position of the president of Reynolds Nabisco. During Johnson's initial 20 years of his career, he moved through a series of medium-sized companies, with no significant success. It was not until he was 42 that he was still an obscure figure. However, his talents in socializing, hosting parties, enjoying Scotch whiskey, and networking were impressive. All of this eventually propelled him to the position of president of Reynolds Nabisco. Henry Kravis, the driving force behind KKR, had roots in a Russian Jewish family that had immigrated to Atlanta when he was young. Like Johnson, Kravis grew up in the hardships of the Great Depression. At a very young age, he was groomed to be a thoughtful, mature, self-sufficient, and responsible individual. At 17, while still in school, he worked part-time as a messenger. One morning, he woke up with his eyes stinging, rendering him temporarily blind, but he managed to complete his delivery mission. After graduating from college, Kravis joined the prestigious Wall Street investment bank Bear Stearns, where he quickly learned the intricacies of acquisitions. Subsequently, he convinced his immediate superior to leave and start a private equity fund together, bringing in his cousin. They named the fund KKR, using the initials of their three names. Kravis was a rising star among the younger generation on Wall Street. He and his wife attended numerous high society parties and public events, mingling with figures like Donald Trump. So, how did Kravis become involved with Reynolds Nabisco? It's inseparable from the financial challenges the company was facing at that time. While the tobacco industry was traditionally lucrative, with established companies enjoying almost guaranteed profits, the growing consensus on the health hazards of smoking was creating problems. Smoking was becoming politically incorrect, and the negative public perception was affecting Reynolds Nabisco's stock performance. By 1986, the company's stock had languished around $70 for an extended period when it should have been at least $100. In the corporate governance structure of the United States, stock price is a primary measure of success. Only when the stock price rises will the board of directors continue to support the management. The main challenge facing CEO Johnson was how to raise the stock price. Johnson attempted 3 strategies: improving corporate governance, increasing production efficiency, and intensifying marketing efforts to optimize financial reports and boost the stock price. However, the main problem wasn't the company's operations but the societal consensus on the health hazards of smoking. Besides, the legitimate approach was slow, and there were no guarantees that the management would survive until the stock price improved. Seeing the limited success of these strategies, some suggested that Johnson use leverage to buy the company, effectively becoming the owner and then partner with KKR. This is where Henry Kravis, with his expertise in leveraged buyouts, entered the picture. However, after careful consideration, Johnson declined Kravis's plan. Despite the low stock price, the company's financial situation was stable, and it generated plenty of cash flow. Johnson reasoned that there was no need to take on the risks of a leveraged buyout when he could enjoy the perks of his current position, such as company-owned airplanes, luxury apartments, and extravagant living, all funded by the company. Originally, this matter seemed to have come to an end. However, a sudden and tumultuous financial crisis changed everything. On October 19, 1987, the New York Stock Exchange experienced Black Monday, with the stock market plummeting by 22% in a single trading day. Reynolds Nabisco's stock price dipped below $40 per share, causing massive losses for shareholders. If $70 per share was considered disappointing, $40 was completely unacceptable. With the year-end board meeting approaching, and their heavily invested Premier brand cigarettes facing failure, the stock price was plummeting. The management had to figure out how to explain this to the board. John Johnson, driven by fear, ultimately decided to take a risky move. Instead of being passive, he wanted to take control and become the owner of the company. However, for a leveraged buyout, cooperation with an investment bank was essential for debt financing. Initially, Johnson considered partnering with the LBO king, KKR, but he was concerned that KKR was too successful and might dominate the deal. Johnson was determined to use the leveraged buyout to transition from being an employee to becoming the boss. Additionally, his long-standing friendship with Jim Robinson, the CEO of American Express, played a significant role in the decision-making process. Trusting a friend in business was a common practice, and American Express was a major player on Wall Street with over 20 million cardholders. Therefore, Johnson approached Robinson and Peter Cohen, the head of Shearson Lehman Brothers, another old Wall Street investment bank, for collaboration. After quickly forming a consortium, the group devised a specific acquisition plan. They used a surprise approach, offering $75 per share to acquire all 220 million shares of Reynolds Nabisco, valuing the company at $17.6 billion. To ensure independence in the deal, the consortium decided not to use junk bonds for financing and obtained all the acquisition funds through commercial bank loans. New York Trust Bank seized the opportunity to provide financing for this premium acquisition. After completing the deal, the management planned to sell Reynolds Nabisco's food business and retain only the tobacco division. This strategic move was due to the fact that the tobacco business generated stable and significant cash flow annually, while the value of the food business was not fully recognized due to its mixed operation with tobacco. Restructuring the business would eliminate market undervaluation and yield substantial returns. In October 1988, Ross Johnson officially proposed the management buyout of the company's equity to the Reynolds Nabisco board. Johnson intended to leverage the board's long-standing support, as well as his deep friendships with its members, to achieve a low-cost acquisition during the board meeting. However, this strategy underestimated the board's adaptability and overestimated their loyalty. Upon receiving the management's acquisition proposal, the board did not rush to respond but subtly leaked the information. This signaled the end of an easy, lightning-fast acquisition battle. Countless Wall Street heavyweights smelled the opportunity and joined the fray. The first to step forward was Henry Kravis, the head of KKR. Kravis, upon learning that Johnson wanted to acquire Reynolds Nabisco for $75 per share, realized that he had been outmaneuvered by Johnson. He had initially introduced the idea of the leveraged buyout and never anticipated Johnson would use it against him. Moreover, $75 per share was significantly lower than the normal value of a blue-chip stock like Reynolds Nabisco, which should have been around $100 per share. Kravis saw Johnson's offer as an attempt to rob the company. Kravis immediately decided to enter the fray, but he encountered a major problem. The New York Trust Bank, with which he had a close relationship, declined his credit request. Desperate, he couldn't find another commercial bank to finance the acquisition. Kravis learned that this was because Johnson's management team had already partnered with New York Trust Bank in the financing plan and had secured an exclusivity clause. Frustrated by this setback, Kravis decided to abandon bank credit entirely and rely on junk bonds for financing. He reached an agreement with Drexel Burnham Lambert, a leading junk bond dealer on Wall Street, to provide financing for the acquisition. After restructuring the financing structure, Kravis officially presented his acquisition proposal to the Reynolds Nabisco board, offering $90 per share and committing to retaining most of the food business. In response, Johnson raised his bid to $92 per share. Kravis then increased his offer to $94 per share. Johnson, in a strategic move, increased his offer to $100 per share, hoping to make it impossible for the board to refuse and for Kravis to match. Facing Johnson's $100 per share offer, Kravis was at a loss. Johnson's management team had intimate knowledge of the company's financial data, giving them a significant advantage in negotiations. Kravis was essentially blind in this competition, as he lacked access to the company's financial information. Without this data, he couldn't make a scientifically sound business plan, and raising the bid would only increase the overall cost. Meanwhile, the First Boston Consortium unexpectedly entered the battle, offering $118 per share. The board agreed to delay the bidding process, allowing First Boston time to refine its proposal and reopen the bidding. This unexpected development gave Kravis an opportunity to regroup. Kravis realized that, since the board was delaying the bidding process, he had time to gather intelligence and refine his plan. The fact that First Boston was willing to offer $118 per share suggested that they might have the capability to secure financing. Kravis had inside information that First Boston had recently undergone internal restructuring and lost several star managers from its leveraged buyout division, along with their knowledge, experience, and client resources. Therefore, their participation seemed more of a show of unity than a serious bid. Seeing First Boston's intentions, Kravis decided to feign disinterest in the bidding process and publicly distanced himself from it. He used this time to go on vacation, ski, and party, hoping to confuse Johnson and prevent him from raising the bid further. This tactic was akin to what Sun Tzu's The Art of War called deceive your enemy by feigning weakness. However, another unexpected event at this crucial moment tipped the balance in Kravis's favor, due to Johnson's plan to sell the company's food business after the acquisition and Kravis's plan to retain it. The head of the company's food division turned against Johnson and secretly aligned with Kravis. He shared the company's financial data with Kravis, giving him the upper hand. Kravis's strategy succeeded, and it became evident that the First Boston Consortium couldn't afford the $118 per share. As the deadline approached, First Boston withdrew from the bidding, seemingly conceding. Kravis waited for the tide to settle, and Johnson was the only one left on the beach. On the bidding day, Johnson, who believed he had the upper hand, only symbolically increased the bid by $1 to $101 per share. At this point, Kravis, unexpectedly returning, proposed a bid of $106 per share, surpassing Johnson. However, a dramatic turn of events occurred. After Kravis presented his bid, he was playing poker in the boardroom's lounge, anticipating the final outcome. Unexpectedly, a friend of Johnson leaked Kravis's bid to him. Johnson promptly raised his bid to $108 per share, then to $112 per share. This situation was unconventional, as bidding prices should have remained confidential. Still, the board had disclosed one party's offer to the other. Kravis was infuriated by this and contemplated leaving. However, Reynolds Nabisco's chairman persuaded him to stay and offered a $45 million advisory fee if he waited an hour. Kravis reluctantly stayed and increased his bid to $109 per share. In the end, during the final bidding round, both parties' bids differed by only $1. However, Kravis promised to give shareholders 25% of the company's shares, while Johnson offered 15%. Kravis committed to selling only a small portion of the food business, whereas Johnson intended to sell the entire food division. This meant massive layoffs under Johnson's plan, making it unpopular with both the board and company employees. At this critical juncture, Johnson's team was exposed to have a golden parachute plan. This plan stated that regardless of the acquisition's success, the management team would receive over $50 million in compensation. Even if the company were acquired by someone else and the management team lost their jobs, they would still have plenty of money to live comfortably. This greedy move by Johnson angered the board and the company's employees, leading to a loss of public support for the management buyout. Ultimately, the board chose Kravis. On February 9, 1989, the two parties signed the deal. Kravis won the century-long takeover battle with an offer of $109 per share, totaling $25 billion. After the acquisition was completed, the former CEO, Ross Johnson, stepped down. Unexpectedly, Louis Gerstner, the vice president of American Express, was brought in as the new CEO of Reynolds Nabisco. With the new leadership in place, Gerstner initiated significant reforms. He sold many of the luxury facilities Johnson had left behind, including 5 out of 6 corporate jets. The premier brand cigarette project was abandoned, and extensive layoffs reduced the workforce to 2,300 employees. The company improved its equipment, increased production efficiency, and significantly cut costs, resulting in a 46% increase in tobacco profits in the first half of 1990. Operating profits in 1989 exceeded previous cash flow by 3.5 times. However, the debt burden from the leveraged buyout severely constrained the company's viability. 1 year later, the company reported a net loss of $1.15 billion in 1989, after servicing the debt generated by the leveraged buyout. In the first half of 1990, there was a loss of $330 million. To enhance debt repayment capabilities, the company had to maintain higher tobacco prices, while its main competitor, Marlboro, could lower tobacco prices. As a result, Reynolds Nabisco's tobacco business shrank to 7 to 8% in 1989. Faced with this dire situation, the new CEO, Gerstner, who lacked experience in the tobacco industry, was helpless. He ultimately resigned in 1993, taking up the role of IBM's president. By early 1995, Kravis had no choice but to divest the remaining equity in Reynolds Nabisco. Reynolds Tobacco Holdings became an independent company once more, while Nabisco became an independent food production enterprise. Everything had returned to where it began. Sure, here's the translation. Well, at this point, the saga of these corporate barbarians comes to an end. Looking back, this century's colossal merger, full of twists and turns, can be deemed a legendary business battle. The first highlight of this merger battle was the war between investment bankers and the company's management. Typically, leveraged buyouts involve a mutual understanding between investment bankers and the target company's management, agreeing on a price and financing method that both sides accept to complete the acquisition. They also make arrangements for post-acquisition management and asset restructuring, aiming to reduce costs, improve efficiency, and sell assets to repay debts. However, in this case, Kravis's private equity fund, KKR, found itself at odds with the management of the target company, Reynolds Nabisco. They didn't even have information about the company's assets and had to participate in the bidding process. The outcome of this struggle marked a comprehensive victory for financial capital over industrial capital. The second highlight of this merger was the triumph of junk bonds over traditional bank credit, which signifies the victory of shadow banking over conventional commercial banking. Shadow banking refers to credit activities occurring outside the traditional commercial banking system. While the most common form of shadow banking for the general public is microlending companies, in the capital markets, it mainly refers to the asset-backed securities refinancing business. All these lending relationships take place outside the strict regulation of banking laws, like operating in the shadows, hence the name, shadow banking. Johnson's team relied on traditional bank credit for financing the acquisition, while Kravis's team relied entirely on investment banks to issue junk bonds for financing, a typical shadow banking credit operation. However, the final result proved that the financing ability of shadow banking's junk bonds surpassed that of commercial bank credit, signaling the widespread rise of shadow banking. Finally, there was the battle for control between investment banks and corporate executives. The ultimate beneficiaries were the shareholders of the company. The company's shares, originally priced at $40, were eventually sold for $109, resulting in profits of up to 2.5 times the original value. The shareholders of Reynolds Nabisco became overnight millionaires. However, this sudden wealth actually meant that many years of the company's future total earnings were cashed in overnight, enriching a few major shareholders but burdening the company itself with heavy debt, severely weakening its viability. This capital game, which sacrificed the future of the company for immediate gains, was criticized as brutal plunder by financial capital on industry. Those engaged in this plundering game became the corporate barbarians at the gate. Alright, this book interpretation concludes here. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you all for listening to the Tim Booker channel. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.